Nathanosaurus Rex here once again with a little bit more of the D and also D. So I want to talk today again a little bit more in a similar vein to my last video where I talked about how not to inadvertently TPK your party by just looking at challenge ratings, which we all know by now are mostly nonsense. There's a little bit more nuance to it, and kind of one of the things I touched on in that was that way better than making an encounter that's difficult or easy is to think about making encounters which are interesting. So what do we mean when we're talking about that? So the three of the key things that I touched on before were that not every encounter necessarily needs to be a fight. You know, maybe it's more interesting if, you know, all of a sudden on the brink of combat, diplomacy breaks out, the horror, or something else happens. You know, you can sneak, you can do a whole world of things to resolve an encounter with some people, some creatures, other than just slugging them into the ground. But when that does happen, because that's going to happen, combat's a central part of any tabletop role-playing game, how can you make that combat more interesting? You know, the last thing you want is to have a bunch of people sat around your table or dialing in via Skype, as we're doing right now because of the whole craziness that's going on in the world. Just saying, okay, I rolled a hit, I rolled a damage, I take 8 HP off. Great, and I'll do the same thing next turn and every turn until they're on the floor. How can we get around that? How can we make our combat encounters a little bit more interesting, varied, and engaging? And one of the first things is, again, something I've talked about before, which is, what's the objective? Following on from that, where's it happening? You know, where's it happening? Why is it happening? And what do both your party and their enemies want to achieve? So, I said before, in terms of objectives, maybe it is a straight up stand-up slugfest. One team's going to knock the other into the ground. That's fine, that's going to happen from time to time, but if it's every time, that gets a little dull. Other objectives you might want to consider are, you know, is there one particular person that you want to take out? Maybe, you know, kill the leader and the rest will lose their will to fight. Maybe you're trying to rescue some prisoners. Maybe you're trying to break through these lines. Maybe the enemy are trying to stop you from getting where you're going. What's their objective? What's the party's opponents want from this? Do they want to steal their stuff? Do they want to distract them? Do they want to delay them? Do they want to kidnap one member of the party, perhaps? Maybe you can flip that, you know, coming in and taking out the leader on its head. Maybe they're looking to take down a specific member of the party and everybody else is just in the way. So if you assign objectives and an idea of what the enemy want out of this encounter themselves, gives them more of a sense of believability and agency, and it informs you as to what kind of tactics they're likely to use against the party. Likewise, if your party have a particular objective other than just kill these dudes, then they're going to think about that combat differently as well and see how they can maybe get a tanky character to, you know, cause a ruckus and draw a bunch of the enemy that way while they sneak around and stab the big guy in the back, or, you know, go and restrain the mage at the rear so he can't keep casting fireballs at you all damn day. So that's the first thing to think about. What's the purpose? What's the objective? And that gives you an idea of how both the party and enemy are going to try to achieve that, which brings us to tactics. Well, one thing that you're going to find that your party are going to want to do is try and set up ambushes. Everybody loves the benefit of that surprise moment. You know, if you've got rogues, they're going to be doing anything they can to try and get their sneak attack bonus, which is great. That really motivates them to try to set things up and play in a more interesting way than just roll a hit, roll a damage, roll a hit, roll a damage. And that sneak attack is a baked-in mechanic that rewards that player of that character for trying different tactics to try and engage that and allow it to work. And you can expand on that by similarly rewarding your players for their creativity. So if your players come up with a cool and interesting way of approaching an encounter, say they have a good idea for like setting up a barricade or a choke point, say they notice something about like, hey, why don't we lure them into this swampy terrain? Why don't we use this to our advantage? Maybe we could, build something here. You don't want to let them get too run away with this, because otherwise you're going to end up playing, with a party who are basically the A team, who given 30 seconds in a mostly empty warehouse are going to come out having built some sort of mech suit that demolishes the enemy instantaneously. Although now I've said it, that actually sounds pretty cool. But yeah, you don't want to let them get sort of too overboard with that all the time and really skew the odds too much in their favour. Otherwise, it's going to make life too easy for them. But if somebody has a creative idea, let them run with it to a degree, and give them, even if it's just a little bit of a bonus from it, even if it's just, well, that's a fun, cool idea, I'm going to give them inspiration for that. That's going to inspire them, not just in terms of having that dice mechanic, but also in terms of playing the game in a more interesting fashion and kind of engaging with the environment and the enemy in different ways, which is great. A good thing to read, and I can't pimp this enough, but there's a Hong Kong action movie roleplay game of kung fu, chop socky, like guns blazing, magic monsters craziness called Feng Shui, which is all about doing super cool, fun, crazy stunts like you'd see your Chow Yun-Fat, Jet Li, Jackie Chan kind of doing, and that's got some great inspiration in for players and dungeon masters, which is easily translatable to any system, for how to kind of think about the environment and think about the terrain you're in and different tactics and cool things to do other than just like, I waste him with my crossbow. So that's well worth a read if you can get your hands on it. Speaking of environment, that is the number one thing I would say for creating an interesting encounter, is think about where this is going to go down, the features of where you are. I mean, if and this is doubly important because this is the first thing that your players are going to hear from you as the DM with your narration. You're walking through the forest. It's getting thicker and darker. The sunlight's filtering through the branches. You come to an opening in the trees, and there's a wide glade. How wide is it? Somebody's inevitably going to shout, 100 foot across, roughly circular. And in the middle of it, there's a band of 6 gnolls. Great, you've set the scene, but what's there? You've kind of set up a big circular arena fight, which is fine. That's going to happen from time to time, but if every combat you get into is just in a bare, featureless arena, really, as I said before, you're looking at stat block v stat block and the luck of the dice. That can be cool sometimes. Sometimes that's going to happen, but if we think about it differently, if we can describe additional things to put into that terrain, then you open up some new avenues and new tactics and more interesting manoeuvres for your players to partake in. And you kind of need to lead on that, as you're the eyes and ears of your players. What they see, what they hear, what they smell, what they taste, what's in their environment is all coming from your description. So if you can add in there a few things, mentions of things like there's some cover over here, there's a change in elevation here, then they're going to start trying to make use of that. Your archer's going to want to get into cover so that they can shoot from safety. People might want to get into a high position so that they've got, they have the high ground. It's all over at that point. We all know that. You might have loose rubble or things that you can dodge behind you that you might describe. Not just you're in a cave. You might describe you're in a cave. There appears to be a minecart and some tracks leading off into a tunnel. well, that's just asking for somebody to hide behind it, kick it down the tracks to bowl a load of people over, hop in it and zip off like Indiana Jones, firing their crossbow as they go, or just to push it and cause a distraction. You know, there's some loose rubble over that side being held up by a beam. You've got somebody thinking, maybe if I make a strength check, I could bring that section of tunnel down and crush the bad guys. If you add just a few of these elements in, you don't need an exhaustive description of every single pebble in the place where a fight's going to take place. Just enough to get your players' imaginations going, and they will start to fill in blanks. And if they start to ask you questions like, so is there a sledgehammer there that I could pick up to break through this wall so we can effect an escape? Or is there a lever for the brakes for that minecart that I can see that maybe, you know, the rogue could sneak over to and pull, or the wizard could get with a mage hand, or, you know, even some clever sod could lasso and pull to let it go from somewhere else without being noticed? Then yeah, sure, why not? I mean, you don't want to, you know, if every time your players are like, there wouldn't happen to be some sort of tank we could immediately commandeer to wipe everything out instantaneously, you maybe don't want to be saying yes to that. But for the most part, if they've got a creative, cool suggestion and you think that's going to be fun and it's not going to completely unbalance my encounter, you should allow it. Maybe they've got to make some skill checks, maybe they've got to make some attack rolls to make good use of that, but it gives you a start to get some creativity running. And again, the more you reward that creativity, the more that creativity is going to come out of your players, and it's going to inspire you, and you're going to think of cool, interesting things in the environment that you can have that can go off on their own, that your bad guys can start to utilise a little bit to mix things up and keep that combat interesting for all of you. So that's just a few of the things I've thought of that can kind of spice up a combat encounter for you a little bit over and above. And, you know, sometimes maybe you don't want to go too overboard with all of this. You know, you can throw too much into an encounter and overwhelm your players. You know, we've all had that feeling restarting Skyrim for the 80th time. You're like, wow, there's so much to do. Every cave has got 1,000 hidden mysteries. I could go and do this, I could go and do that. I don't know where to start. So you don't want to overwhelm them with too many options, because frankly, we know what they're like. They're going to forget about 90% of them and probably just try to set fire to everything. Again, what is it about D&D that brings out the pyromania, kleptomania, and nymphomania in literally everyone? I couldn't tell you. But if you allow them a few options just to mix things up, that is going to bring a lot of creativity and a lot of interest. But conversely, some of the most interesting, like, exciting battles you can have, maybe it will be that 1v1 in an open, blank sand arena where it's just them versus their opponent, steel on steel, with a roaring crowd. So, is there anything else? Probably a million things that you could do to spice up combat. If you've got any ideas, then yeah, I'd be interested to see them in the comments, because, I mean, I'm not going to lie, if you've got good ideas, I'm probably going to steal them and throw them at my party and then tell them it's your fault. Thanks.